So, welcome back to the Lake Erie Library. I am Beth.
And I'm Britta.
And I sound very husky today because I am getting over a summer cold. So, at least we sound different to listeners today.
We might. I don't know. I think I'm existentially suffering a summer cold right now. Emotional cold. It's been a week.
It's been a really rough week.
We both had flooded basements. It was like Night of the Twisters in our part of Ohio.
Yeah, there was a lot going on.
Without the plus of Devon Sawa being involved, so it was just all garbage.
It was all garbage. All right, so we're here to discuss with you today, dear listeners. I wish we had a cool thing to call.
We'll get
people.
there.
Yeah,
we'll get there.
We'll figure it out. Not today. But anyways, we're here to discuss with you today some summer films, summer horror films. So the difference between these films and any other horror films, which I always like Halloween horror films particularly, that's really my jam. But summer horror films have their own little niche, I feel like, because you're like, when am I safe from horror? And the answer is never. You're never safe from it. It happens all year round. So we're going to discuss with you some of these you may know. Some of these you might be like, I have never heard of that movie, but it sounds interesting and I'm going to check it out. So let's begin. Let's dive in.
Yeah, I think summer horror in particular, it sort of plays on that whole, you should be scared of the dark. So obviously, Halloween horror, autumnal horror, winter horror, it's dark out more often than it's light out. So you have these long days, you think you're safe in the light, but
you're never safe.
You're not safe, as Beth said.
So I want to start with, I feel like we should start with the two movies that actually happen on the solstice, which are The Wicker Man and Midsommar. We're talking about, when I say The Wicker Man, I'm talking about the OG Wicker Man from England, which is considered one of the best British horror films from 1973. Not the one with Nicolas Cage. You'll come to find out, I personally love Nicolas Cage, unapologetically love that man. So you're never gonna hear oh god, Nicolas Cage for me. We'll just talk about the OG one because it's considered the superior film.
It's pretty wild. Now I'm just thinking about the Nicolas Cage one though, because you brought, what is he? The bees. Yeah, that one. That's probably what most of you know about. My God, I'm sorry for what I just did to your ears. I'm looking at my screen now. I should have given a warning. We're going to have to put a Nick Cage warning on any episode where we discuss him, because that's going to keep happening. The soundtrack for the original Wicker Man, it's superb. It's so strange and folk horror-y, and it is a good chunk of my Halloween playlist.
Excellent.
I have a Halloween playlist. It's on Spotify. I'll link it for everyone's enjoyment. I start listening on the first day of October, and that's all I listen to through the entire month.
I too have a Halloween playlist, but it's on my YouTube page because I don't have Spotify. I need to get with the times. I'm an on the cusp millennial for technology.
I didn't have Spotify. I had YouTube Music for the longest time, Google Play Music, which became YouTube Music. But then I realized that you can get Spotify really cheap if you're a student.
Okay.
And it's bundled with my Hulu, and it used to be Showtime as well. And now Showtime is somewhere else, and I got to pay $11.99 for it. But that's the only reason I switched to Spotify, is because I got it for really cheap. Original Wicker Man. Oh my God. Look at this poster for it.
I love it.
It's just the giant Wicker Man with the sun shining through him. Incredible. Yeah, but the music from it, there's this weird... The song I always think of is the one where it's I know I'm going to butcher it. It's it reminds me of and the dog and the leaf and the leaf and the tree and the tree and the house and the house and the car and the car. And it's there's listing things, but it's these weird like folky British children singing it,
which inherently makes it kind of creepy though too.
Yeah, children singing should be joyous, but it is really one of the most terrifying things out of context.
Yes.
And it's just very like inadvertently spicy, the whole movie. Like the whole thing is a fertility festival essentially.
Right, right.
And so like they have a whole bunch of songs about just like going to Bone City in it, but like again sung by small British children and teenagers. I just broke her a little bit, sorry.
So let's start with, if you guys haven't seen it, it again was made in 1973 and it stars
Christopher Lee.
Good for him.
Mm-hmm. Britt Eklund is another famous name.
And the essential plot synopsis of it is that, actually I'll let Britta take this over because I have not seen the OG Wicker Man. It is on my to be watched list. But being a mom now means less movie time for me, so I have to like pencil it in my schedule.
It's been a long time since I've seen the remake, so maybe you can help chip in like with the differences.
I'll be honest, I haven't seen the remake.
Okay,
just clips
never
of it.
mind then. No one tell Nicolas Cage that she has disappointed him. So this original one, it takes place on an island off the coast of Scotland. And the main character he's a police officer, and he shows up. He's sort of a devout Christian, and he shows up and finds this island essentially full of Celtic pagans. As she mentioned, it is like a lauded film. It has much acclaim to it.
Yes.
And so he essentially goes there to investigate the disappearance of a girl. A girl has gone missing. He gets sent there to see if he can try to figure out what happened to her. He shows up and everyone's just kind of like banging it out in like the open. Like they're in fields getting it on. Like kids are just running around these people who are fornicating outside.
So the question is it a horror movie because this was made in the 70s during kind of like, devout Catholicism and Christianity, so the idea of like sex being out in the open and whatnot is just, it's too much to bear for our poor little Christian sentience.
That's possible.
Sensibilities.
It's possible. And they really like harp in on like the phallic symbolism of the maypole while these kids are dancing around it with ribbons. And the main character is staying at a local inn, and he starts to notice all of these photographs from past celebrations, and he hones in on the fact that there's always a May Queen, which will come up later when we discuss Midsommar. And he starts asking questions about these photographs, and he notices that the one from the most recent celebration is missing. So he starts asking, and the landlord's like, "Oh no, it broke. The frame broke. So we don't have that one up." And so then he starts asking kids at the local school about the girl who was missing. Her name's Rowan, and they all just act like they don't know who she is, that she never existed, she's not real. And he, goes in and he checks all of the school records, and she's there. So he asks a teacher, and the teacher tells him, "You need to go check this grave."
Oh.
And it is listed as being her grave. He asks, "Can we dig her up? Like, I need to make sure that this is really her."
Mm-hmm.
And then the local like island leader, Lord Summerisle, because this is the name of the island they're on, Summerisle, explains that my grandfather came here, and he sort of propagated all of these fruit trees, and it's really a credit to him that he was able to grow all of this beautiful nature in Scotland's weird climate. And the old gods will bring these new strains and prosperity as long as we keep up, our sacrifices to them, and we show them that we care and we follow their ways. And so that's why we're all pagans. And so, we can dig her up, but just be careful of how we treat the earth and respect the earth. And he digs up the grave, pulls out the coffin, and what do you think's inside?
I hope bees.
That would be incredible. It's not. It's a dead rabbit. But he also finds the missing harvest photo with Rowan in it, and she's around a bunch of empty boxes because the harvest had failed.
Oh.
So he starts looking into what this guy was talking about with the pagan gods and finds that human sacrifice used to be the go-to, and he assumes Rowan is going to be sacrificed to appease the gods. So he's now on this time crunch to save Rowan. And so he goes...
This is happening by the solstice, right?
Correct.
Gotcha.
So he finds he can't get off the island because somebody messed up his plane. They broke his radio. He can't call for help. He ends up infiltrating their little festival. Everybody's sort of wearing masks and things like that. And so he goes undercover and he sees Rowan's there. He sets her free and they try to run away, but they end up catching them, and Rowan is just like, no, these are my people. I'm gonna go back.
Oh.
This is when Summer Isle tells our main guy, she was not supposed to be the sacrifice. You were supposed to be the sacrifice. So this whole thing is just a twist that it was planned from the beginning. This is how they were going to get him there. This is how they were going to sacrifice him. And he fits their 4 requirements, which is that he came of his own free will. He has the power of a king because he's a police officer. He's a virgin.
Oh, no.
And he's a fool. So the crops are failing. They need a sacrifice, and they're gonna sacrifice him when the next harvest fails again. So they stick him inside a giant wicker man with a bunch of animals that are also sacrifices. They stand around it and sing some more like happy-go-lucky May songs, and they set it on fire and burn him alive. The end.
The end.
Happy times.
Yeah, still considered one of the best British horror movies, and it's one of the first daytime horror movies. So most of this movie does take place in the daytime.
Yeah, if it didn't end in sacrifice, it also, as we've mentioned before in past episodes, would just sort of look, well, and I guess the naked body is writhing outside as well. Take those and the human sacrifice away, and it would look like something like a little cozy, quaint English, Scottish town where...
With the geese.
Primrose and
Eunice.
And Eunice would just be enjoying a cuppa outside. Look at the wee ones dancing around the maypole.
I really hope we don't, in the future, get, very British listeners going man, these Americans are so rude.
Well, they're going to get really mad because I just did a weird northern English accent, and this takes place in Scotland, which is not England.
No.
So, sorry, Scotland. David Tennant will never listen to this.
Nope. So another daytime horror movie, flash forward to 2019. This is Ari Aster's Midsommar, stars Florence Pugh.
Florence Pugh.
And that's actually the only person I remember off the top of my head.
Jack Rayner.
Jack Rayner, that's right.
He's incredibly good looking, but plays a total tool.
He does.
And Will Poulter, who has since become much more famous. He's on the most recent season of The Bear, and he's incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
And then what is the guy from The Good Place? I gotta ask the Google machine.
So while she's doing that, if you haven't watched that movie, I would recommend you do. Also a daytime horror film. I don't think if there are any night or dark scenes, it's very few.
William Jackson. He plays Chidi on The Good Place.
That's right. So anyways, so this movie is really about a breakup.
Good for her.
So this movie follows Florence Pugh's character. Her name is
Danny.
And Danny is suffering a huge tragedy. She loses both of her parents and her sister in a murder-suicide.
That scene, which essentially opens, it is so interestingly shot.
Yes.
It is haunting as well.
Yes.
And her reaction is, like, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it.
I am too.
But I think about that opening scene and just how it follows, like, the line through the house, because it is essentially through the car exhaust.
Right.
It's carbon monoxide poisoning, et cetera, et cetera.
So Danny finds out that her sister, who was not mentally well, killed their parents and herself, and she is with this guy, and she essentially leans on him for support for, I think, the next year or so. But she's obviously depressed. I mean, why wouldn't you be? Like, I feel like that's a very normal reaction to this immense amount of grief.
Correct. She lost her entire family in one go, on top of having for years felt the weight of what it is like having a family member with severe mental health issues like bipolar disorder.
Right.
And so it's that constant worrying that something like this is going to happen, and then it happens. And then her boyfriend, Christian, is not the most patient person dealing with her grief.
No. So he and his buddies have been talking about going to Sweden, right? Yes.
Correct.
Yes, Sweden.
To Harga.
So they've been talking about going there because they do also have, like, a foreign exchange student living with them, and they're going to go visit his village essentially to witness the customs. And Christian, as kind of like a last-ditch effort, invites Danny with them. And
I believe Pele also extended the offer to her too.
Who all of, like, when she's not around, you see, like, them all kind of being bro-y about, like, she needs to get over herself, like, why haven't you dumped her, etc., etc. So it does not paint any of these guys in really a super sympathetic light.
Yeah. I think it's more also as, like, a CYA, a cover your own bootata, because the reason Christian doesn't say anything to Danny about this ahead of time is because he didn't plan on still being with her by the time the trip came around. He was going to break up with her,
right?
And then her whole family died,
right? So, and essentially, especially his 2 out of the 3 are real jerks about, like, how sad she is. So they all pack up and go to Sweden, and at first everything seems cool, a little weird, but, like, pretty chill, a little eccentric, if you will. And they're just exploring kind of these customs and this culture of Pele. And, you know, it seems like it's going to be all right. As soon as they get there, they take mushrooms and trip on them. And then it's such a beautifully shot film. Like, it is gorgeous.
Just fields of, like, beautiful wildflowers. Everything is very bright. The colors are, like, the contrast is, like, it's, like, very saturated.
Yes, very saturated. All of the village members wear white against, like, very green landscape. And then in the back of the village, there is this, like, bright yellow triangle. It looks kind of like a tent, but it's like a structure. Yeah,
it's essentially a cabin, but I'm sure there's, like, a proper word for it, but I'm not an architect, so I don't know what that is. But it is the most vibrant color of yellow.
Yes. Essentially, they are all participating in these customs leading up to Midsummer, the festival of, like, celebrating the summer solstice. And in Sweden, if you don't know geographically, they have it's a 24-hour day essentially, because they're so close to the North Pole. So they have like so many beautiful hours of daylight, and so they are doing these customs, and then things start to get weird.
And at this point, if you have not seen it, you're going to want to jump ahead because we're going to discuss some very spoilery things from this one.
Yes.
I'm not so worried about doing that with The Wicker Man because I
old.
feel like a lot of people are not going to watch the one that I watched, and you might only sort of hate watch the Nicolas Cage one because it is a bit sillier inadvertently. So you're going to want to jump ahead a little bit if you don't want to have spoilers, but we are going to discuss the sort of twists and turns of the plot now.
Right. So the first thing that they witness, I believe, is it the human sacrifice? Is that where they're like, oh, stuff's getting real?
The ceremony on top of the cliffs.
So they witness two, I would say, elderly people of the village essentially sacrifice themselves and jump off this cliff.
They're 72.
They're 72, and in full Ari Aster fashion, you get to see all the nitty-gritty, horrible, like, bones, like, snapping and stuff like that, and you hear the crunch of, like, the bodies hitting the ground, and it's awful.
Ari Aster has a real thing for heads getting smashed in and women keening.
Yes.
In agony.
Which, that's your thing. Sometimes it can be a bit much. Like, I don't mind the women keening so much, but, like, the head ones, I'm just like, oh, wait a minute.
Like deflated basketballs.
Yes. So then they're like, this is not what we signed up for. And Danny's like, I need to get the heck out of here. Like, I'm done with this. Like, take me home.
And this is something that I'm going to talk about later with other movies too, but this is where it sort of comes into that like cultural, I don't want to say empathy, it's just like cultural awareness, differences in culture, because Danny as an American is horrified by this. Essentially, like we would not euthanize elderly people here, but
right.
That is essentially, it is like a self-euthanization, willing participants.
Right.
There, and she's horrified by it, but they in this community expect this is what your life leads up to. Everyone willingly does this,
right? And you essentially live like this very nice, good, prosperous life, and this is like your kind of way of giving back to the earth and giving back to the community that has provided for you all this time,
right? And then at that point also is when Josh Cheaty
yes
is like, I'm gonna write my senior thesis on this,
right?
He's like an anthropology student or a sociology student, something like that.
And then Christian, being the dirtbag he is like, I also am gonna write my thesis about this. And he's like, you can't do that. Like, I literally have been studying this culture and working with Pele for like ever, and now you're essentially like stealing my thunder.
Right. And so they're caught up in their like bro fight. I know, I hear the tater tot screaming too.
Yes.
So this bro fight over who's gonna write their thesis and stop stepping on my toes, and Pele's just like, Danny, you know what? Like, you're very welcome here. I really want you to stay here. I understand your pain. My parents died too, so I know what that feels like. And that sort of softens her, and she's like, okay, well, I guess I could stay.
And then it doesn't help on top of that. The whole subplot is happening. There is a beautiful redheaded woman in the village who is making eyes at Christian. And I think at this...
putting her pubes in his food.
Yeah. Which... I think he does say something about it, but nobody really makes it a big deal. But then after this point, things are starting to heighten up, and I think people start going missing. So I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, there's like two other like outsiders who were brought with their friend that they met up with when they all did shrooms.
Right.
And they're like, they see the elder sacrifice, and they're like, we're done, we're out, get us out of here. And so they're like, okay, well, we'll take them to the train station. Yes. That's fine.
So they leave. So we think they leave.
And then Will Poulter pees on the tree.
Yeah, Will Poulter, what are you doing, man? Like, you guys have bathrooms. What are you doing?
So it's a sacred tree, and he bros out and pees on this tree, which is like horrifying to the community members, and they sort of lure him into the woods and murder him.
Yep. And then at this point, I think they're starting to prepare for the May Queen.
They
while
are.
This is going on. So
And
Danny is kind of pulled into that. But before she's pulled into that, she witnesses the redhead, like, making eyes at Christian, and Christian not, like, rebuffing the attention, essentially.
Yeah. And also, I'm just going to keep calling him Cheaty. He also sneaks into the building to take pictures.
Oh, yes. He goes into a sacred building that he should not be in and takes pictures, which, you know, for them, that would be like cultural appropriation. Like, you didn't get permission to go in there. You didn't ask about this. Like, you're essentially very American, like, seeking information and not, like, getting context for it.
Yeah, and this is like, you know, there's some things that are closed practices. And if you are not a part of that community and you have not been educated in it by elders in that community, you are not supposed to do it. I'm looking at you, voodoo. That's not for us outside that community to take part in. Nope. That's a closed practice. Sage, burning sage. That's technically a closed practice. So stop doing that. You can burn other things. And so he goes in and he takes those pictures. He's taking pictures of murals and sacred texts. He gets caught and gets murdered by the guy wearing Will Poulter's face.
Oh, yeah. God. The murders that happen, too, like, you see some of them, but you don't see all of them.
It's with a hammer, too, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's pretty nasty. So then at that point, Danny...
She does the maypole.
And she wins. And nobody, I think, was really expecting it. And then Christian was watching her. Mm-hmm. And she's like, they all drink this, it's like kind of alcoholic, but it's like a flower, like, drink.
Yeah. It's for sure drugged.
And so she's drinking that, or she's drunk on that. She's been spinning around the maypole for a while. And then she kind of is like so excited, but then she goes to find Christian and he's not there. And then she goes into the building that Cheaty should have not been in. And she finds Christian banging the redhead.
And it is like a really weird orgy. And so like part of me is like, hey, like I'm kind of on board with this because it is technically in the context of this story. They bring in outsiders,
right,
to stop like essentially incest, because a lot of the people in the community are
they're related.
So they bring in these outsiders. So it is not essentially like a, ooh, I'm in love with him thing. It is just a necessity thing.
Right.
And in that moment, she's not alone. There's other women in there with her.
Everyone's naked. Everybody is naked.
They're all moaning like she's moaning while they are having sex.
So it's not sensual. I mean, it might have been sensual to start out with because the redhead essentially lures Christian in there, but it's not sensual in the practice. It is very ceremonial in practice, but it is horrifying to see because especially us Americans with our puritanical values are like, what the hell is going on?
Well, I think it's also just sort of horrifying because at this point we're all identifying with Danny. She's our main character.
Right.
And so to see her have her heart broken because she sees her boyfriend, who's already been terrible to her, cheating on her. But then I love that scene. I mean, this is the Keening scene, but I love that scene where she like has a panic attack and she's like screaming, right, and all of the women are on the floor with her
communally,
also screaming, and there's this sort of like cathartic release amongst them, and this, Danny, you've been so alone because your family died, but like you have found sort of a community here. Like these women are taking your pain and sharing it.
Right. Yes, that scene is so powerful. And if you've seen any like still images, like usually those are the, I think they've made a meme of her face crying. I'm sure they have. that's what that scene's from. But it is really, really powerful. And it's at that point where things kind of turn for the worse.
The pace for sure picks up at this point.
Because then she's going around. I think she's ready to leave at that point. And I think when she goes to try to leave, she starts finding the bodies of her missing friends.
There's just a leg in a flower bed.
There's a leg in the flower bed. She goes into what looks like, I think it's supposed to be like a chicken coop. And she finds Will Poulter's character strung up. And then, so she's like finding all these body parts, and then they're like, the village takes her, and they at that point had drugged Christian, but then they take her and they dress her in flowers as the May Queen. And then they put him in a bear suit, and they essentially explain that with the sacrifices, everybody, like each person represented a different sacrifice. The only one I can remember is I think Will Poulter's the Fool, right?
Yeah, I know they need 9 total, and so the 2 friends, Chidi and Will Poulter, the 2 other tourists, Connie and Simon, who were not taken to the train station.
They were not.
Then the 2 elders, that takes them to 6.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like 2 other people who voluntarily sacrifice themselves. So that's 8. And then she has to choose between Christian and just like another random person. And that's when they stuff him in the bear suit.
They stuff him in the bear suit, and then they stick him in the giant yellow cabin, and they light everything in the cabin on fire. And so it ends with her gloriously beautiful.
That's the other thing, is that she's wearing this full weird pyramid dress of flowers and a crown, which Florence Pugh has said many times was like the most heavy thing ever, and they had to hide a stool under it for her so that between takes she could sit down, and somebody had to come and hold a fan on her to like blow the air.
I can only imagine they're actually filming in summer. It's probably terrible.
Yeah. And then it ends with her sort of watching the burning building Florence Pugh has the best sad girl face. Like she does this like lip quiver thing that just it like breaks me every time. And she's she's crying, her eyes are puffy, she's covered in flowers, and she just gets this little bit of a smirk on her face. And it's just, and at the end, you as the viewer, like, good for her. Like, good. So, she's now essentially, I always took it as like she's essentially a part of that community now. That's how I took it too. And I'm like, maybe her and Pele get together. I don't know, or maybe she stays single for a while, but now she has like a family. Right. So, both good choices for like very summer, like high peak of this is the beginning of summer films. A lot of the other films I was looking at take place in July, which I think is hysterical for summer movies. Like, and not just like 4th of July movies, which we're looking at you, Jaws. Like, how can you not watch any movie? Like, even AMC, if you're like watching TV, they'll have like a random like movie marathon, watch Jaws all weekend. I'm like, yes, it's not 4th of July without Jaws. There's also, and I can go into it later, but there is also the series on Hulu, Into the Dark, which is all holiday themed horror movies for each episode. And they have an Independence Day episode it's called Culture Shock. So that is also a Independence Day horror movie. Another one I want to talk about, which I also watch around Independence Day because it takes place on July 3rd, is Return of the Living Dead. I am a zombie enthusiast. I love zombie movies. I've seen quite a few zombie movies, but this one is up there as one of my top favorites. Like, I love George Romero. I love all of his zombie films, but this one is not a George Romero. It's Dan O'Bannon and somebody else. I can't remember it. Anyways, so George Romero and the guy he wrote Night of the Living Dead with had a falling out. And it essentially, because Night of the Living Dead
is under public domain, so you could watch that on YouTube or wherever you want, really, because it's in public domain. He, after that, as you notice, it's Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead. Nobody has Living Dead, so he wasn't able to keep the rights to the title of Living Dead, but
interesting.
His co-writer was. So essentially, he took that title and then he came up with this idea, but then they rewrote it because it was like more serious. And this movie is extremely campy. It's set in Kentucky, and it is also has a really banging soundtrack. Like, so good. It's such a good title, and then it has a lot of good 80s music, and it's about a group of like punk teens, because the one friend, Freddie, he gets a job at a medical warehouse, supply warehouse, and his punk friends are like waiting for him to get out of his job at like 10 o'clock at night. And so they're partying at a cemetery nearby, and everything is like very tongue-in-cheek, and it's very, very funny. The guy he's working with takes him around, and he essentially shows him, like, down in the basement, they have like these canisters, and he essentially, like, this is where it gets really, I think it's funny, but really tongue-in-cheek of like, yeah, you remember that movie Night of the Living Dead? Oh, that was true. Classic government mix-up.
I love when horror movies do like a weird meta thing. I know some people hate that. I think it's hysterical.
If it's done well, I love it. If it's like I'm just referencing stuff to reference stuff, I'm like, okay, we're done here. Scream, especially the newer Scream films, toe the line of like where I'm like, all right, okay, well, we're getting there. But anyways, they dumbly bang on the container and release this gas which reanimates all of the dead. And so it's them essentially dealing with this like zombie apocalypse, and this is the first zombie film where they actually mentioned brains. Before that, in other zombie films, they didn't talk about them specifically eating brains. So this is the first movie that you say brains. So thank you, Return of the Living Dead.
Did you just see, like, when you looked at me, did you see the shooting star rainbow, like, do-do-do-do? Because I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You taught me something new today, Beth.
Well, that's what we're here for. So anyways, it's just a really great movie. I love it. It, as I said, Jaws and Return of the Living Dead are my 4th of July viewing. I won't, since you haven't seen it, and I would like you to see it eventually. I'm not going to spoil the ending for it, but the punk rockers are good in it. Linnea Quigley, who is a 80s scream queen, she's very sexy. She does dance naked in the cemetery at one point.
It's my kind of party.
It's like, man, it's so that part's so funny. And then right after, like before that, she's like with this head like rocker, and he's like, everyone thinks this is just a look, but punk's like a way of life, man. And then she's like gyrating on him, and he's like, get away from me. I'm like, oh my god,
that's incredible.
So yeah, worth the watch if you're looking for like a slightly campy but just fun zombie movie.
So my July 4th movie is I Know What You Did Last Summer.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I have so much nostalgia tied in with, like, this and Scream were like really in my formative years.
Right.
Like Scream came first.
Right.
And then this was in 1997.
So they were like a year apart. It
yeah.
was a good time for 90s slasher
and
movies.
I actually think I bought the paperback of the book.
Okay.
At like a book sale at school.
That's
first.
Hysterical that they sold it at an elementary
school.
Well,
I think the book was like first, and then they made a movie out of it.
That's even funnier.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I need to like fact check myself on this, but I do think I got it from like a Scholastic book sale, along with like a scratch and sniff like bookmark or something that probably had a kitten and like a top hat on it or something like that. But yeah, I oh man, there's something about anytime I have to wear like a spaghetti strap tank top, at some point in that day, I am going to pull a Jennifer Love Hewitt and just scream, "What are you waiting for?"
Which is also one of my favorite things that Scary Movie like parodied, was that, and then Sarah Michelle Gellar's it's not supposed to be a fake monologue. It's her really telling her boyfriend, like, "Get away from that killer," and everyone's like, "Oh my god, bravo, bravo, what a great monologue."
This might be the most controversial thing in this entire episode, but how do you pronounce his name?
Philippi.
So that is what I hear most people saying, and I'm not sure if it is correct.
Felipe?
Ryan Philippi. But I, from like my childhood when this movie came out, always called him Ryan Philippi.
Oh.
And I don't know what the correct pronunciation is.
I swear I've heard, like, on, like, you know, back when you watched TV and entertainment, like Weekly and Entertainment Tonight was on, I swear that's like where I heard Felipe at. But we both know, like, this will be a running joke in the series, is that I read everything and don't know how to pronounce things, so
it's true. And
take things, as I say, with a grain of salt.
And I was a theater major in college my first time around, and had to take like a full year where they made me memorize the International Phonetic Alphabet. So I often will correct that. But on this one, I don't know, because I don't see a phonetic spelling of his last name, so I can't even correct myself. But
so, dear viewers, if you in the comments tell us that it's pronounced a completely different way than the two ways we just said, thank you. We'll take that and we'll keep that in mind.
Yeah. But this, I know what you did last summer, just the basics of it, because they did just recently make a television series or a limited series on, I think, Amazon.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know if it's following the same plot. I had no interest in watching it. I got burned by the Scream series, and it was so bad that I'll never fall for that again.
I wanted to watch that, so I'm glad you said something.
But it essentially, on July 4th, there's a group of friends. They're like high school students, and they are driving to the beach. They're drunk, and they hit someone on the road. And rather than get in trouble for like drunk driving and drinking underage, they dump this poor man's body into the water and then swear they're never going to talk about it again. And then a year later, you know, this is like their freshman year of college. Jennifer Love Hewitt, her character's name is Julie. She comes home, and it is like around the anniversary of this accident.
Right.
Everybody has kind of gone their separate ways. Nobody is really friends anymore, even though some of them still live in town. And she gets a letter that says, "I know what you did last summer." So she starts hunting down her friends, which is Sarah Michelle Gellar and Freddie Prinze Jr. and Ryan, last name redacted. and they're trying to figure out what's going on. So they're like, well, maybe it was, you know, the one guy, which I think is Johnny Galecki. Isn't he the one friend that sees them on the road?
I think so. Yeah, that sounds
Their one
right.
friend saw them the night of the accident, and so they're like, well, maybe it's him just messing with us. Maybe it's like, you know, maybe it's like the guy, like maybe he wasn't dead,
right,
and he's like coming after us. We don't know what's going on. And then slowly, one by one, they all keep getting these like mysterious messages. They are getting picked off one by one. Sadly, there is like a terrifying scene with, it's Bridget Wilson, who plays Sarah Michelle Gellar's older sister, and she's in that store at night that she works in. It's like all the mannequins.
Oh yeah.
And they're all covered. Like she goes in the room, there's like some of them are covered in sheets, and so she doesn't know if it's a mannequin or if it's the killer.
Right.
The killer's also walking around in a raincoat with like a hook hand, like a meat hook for the ice hook for fishing.
Yes.
And so then they think it's like this other guy who works on a fishing boat. And then doesn't Freddie Prinze Jr. also work on the fishing boat?
I think so, yes. At one point he was the red herring.
Yeah, so there's like some really great scenes with that. And then also the scene that always gets me is they go to find the sister of the guy who died, which is what's her name? You know who I'm talking about.
I do know you're
Anne
talking
Hesh.
about. Okay, Anne.
I was like, she dated Ellen DeGeneres. Whole other hot mess, that relationship. It's Anne Hesh. Hesh. I don't know. It's her. And they go to her house, and it's like everything in that scene feels so sweaty. She lives on like a farm. They're like poking around in her house. She chases them down the road afterwards because she like knows who they are. She knows something's going on. So you think it's her. Like there's just a lot of twisty turnies in this. And so very good summer movie. Feels like a summer movie. It feels very sweaty. Even the scenes when they're like crawling around in fish guts and ice.
Yeah. The sequel to that will always terrify me, and is part of the reason why I've never been in a tanning bed.
I was just gonna say, it's the tanning bed is the worst death in the second one.
Yeah, like my little mind, because I was a child when these came out. My little mind was like blown. That like one, I was like, I'm really pale anyways, but then two, to be like, you can die like that.
Yeah, a girl gets cooked alive inside of a tanning bed. That's, the sequel, which is so cleverly titled, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, and takes place while the survivors are at college, and has Brandy in it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember Brandy's in it, and I remember the tanning bed scene.
Yeah, and it's like a tropical island setting, and also feels very summery.
And speaking of, since we just talked about a farmhouse, I feel like first of all, we need to casually mention The Burning. So
I haven't seen this one yet, but it is, as of August of 2023, available online. For streaming.
The Burning is, well, first of all, it was one of Harvey Weinstein's first movies that he produced.
Yikes.
If we're trying to separate art from the artist and stuff, I mean, he technically just financially backed the film, but
it's true.
It stars Jason Alexander. He's like one of the people in it. I won't say but he's like very much prominent in it.
George Costanza?
Yes, and he's a baby, but he's still like a full-grown man. But he's playing a teenager.
Jason Alexander is like a good-looking dude.
He
is viewed as like a buffoon because of George Costanza, but even in like Pretty Woman, good-looking guy. Also, his son Gabe, good-looking guy.
So anyways, this came about with the idea that it's a slasher film, and it's like an underrated slasher film. But it came from a legend from a camp about this guy that got burned alive that worked as like a camp like custodian, and now he's like essentially their boogeyman. He's gonna get you. So that's like the premise of the movie. They just elaborated on it, and it is about a guy that got burned, hence The Burning.
Is it Cropsey?
Cropsey, yes. And it is about these group of campers who are essentially terrified by Cropsey, who's like staking them out and killing them one by one. It's a good film. It's a good slasher film where I always give myself low expectations for slasher films because I know I'm like, here's the formula. Are we going to exceed the formula? Are we not going to even meet the standards for the formula? What are we getting? It's good. Jason Alexander is young in it. I think this was one of his first movie roles. He wears like a cool football jersey the entire time. We're like, all right, he seems capable. Let's follow him. There is like a terrifying scene. The campers essentially have to leave one campsite, and they don't want to go through the woods because Cropsey could get them. So they make rafts and canoe their way down a river, which is pretty terrifying because like Cropsey's like on the edges. So they're like, if we even stop to rest, we like can't because he could get us. So would highly recommend that movie as like a good slasher film if you're like, I want to see something different. But also, we can't talk summer films without talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, OG like slasher film.
Also a very sweaty movie.
Yes. And no matter which of the iterations you're watching. I
know that I have seen the original because my really love that it's been turned into maybe not the most controversial thing, Ryan Phillippe. I pronounce it GIF. Like choosy moms choose GIF. I know some of you like GIF, but you're wrong. So
I also call it GIF, so we are on the same page with that.
So I love the GIF of Leatherface at the end with the chainsaw where he's like dancing essentially.
Quite essentially, it is like brutal but beautiful at the same time. Like that scene is like it's awesome in like the truest sense of the word, where you're like in awe, but you're also, it's like part of the subliminal experience of like you're horrified because it is this man in this like human made mask, like human flesh, wielding a chainsaw, which Gunnar Hansen has come out and said like he almost hit himself with the chainsaw, so like I'm glad he didn't. A lot of them, that was like a dangerous set to work on because they worked very long days and it was sweaty and they were like trying to be under budget, so I can't imagine. But you know, and I feel like Toby Hooper gets a lot of like, I feel like he gets a lot of kind of not enough credit where credit's due, but you know, this is one of the first slasher movies like that, and Black Christmas are considered kind of the predecessors to things like Halloween, to things like, you know, Friday the 13th, etc., which, you know, Friday the 13th also, I almost feel like I can mention that, but I don't want to dive into that because everybody knows about Friday the 13th.
But yes, that is also a summer horror movie with a baby Kevin Bacon in it.
Yes. What a good death. But
yeah, so you mentioned Toby Hooper, who I'm sure we'll talk about in other episodes, especially when we talk about Stephen King, who is, for both of us, one of our favorite authors.
Yep.
Because Toby Hooper has done a lot of Stephen King adjacent film work.
Mm-hmm.
But also, to backtrack a bit, I know that I have seen it because I recognize that GIF moment, but I am more familiar with the remake,
which also has like, I remember the remake, but the last time I saw it was when I was younger, like at least a decade ago, and I always remember that remake, one, because it has all the young stars in it, but two, because the opening scene of that film, they pick up this like girl who's essentially the final girl of that movie, and she pulls a gun from between her legs.
That is, I was just gonna say, it's so disturbing. God, when did the remake come out? I'm gonna,
was it, I think 2003.
It was 2003. I know I wasn't in high school, or I was fresh out of high school. 2003, you're right. So that was my junior into senior year of high school. And I just remember not totally knowing what I was getting into. I think I saw it because of Mike Vogel and Jessica Biel.
Yep.
And then my best friend wanted to see it because she loves Jonathan Tucker, who's also, he's the brother.
Okay.
Who in the original is his name Franklin, is that the one?
That sounds right. He falls out of a wheelchair,
yeah,
and it's like, it should not be as comical as it is.
Yeah,
it's
his
terrible.
name is Morgan in the remake. But yeah, it's so traumatizing watching it because it's this poor girl who's like, some kind of way they pick her up and then she pulls a gun out of her hoo-ha.
Yep.
Out of her cash and prizes.
That's absolutely correct. Really messed me up as a kid.
Clam burger. I don't know. This is getting like bad. I have a lot of euphemisms for it.
But that's also like those remakes too. Out of all of the slasher films, I would say Texas Chainsaw Massacre probably has taken the most liberties with continuity. I see that with a grain of salt because the Halloween movies have now also jumped a lot in continuity, but I guess with the new ones, you're not supposed to acknowledge Halloween 2.
Is it like a different?
Halloween,
is it like
It's like a parallel, like,
is it like
a parallel timeline.
Yeah, like the Marvel now, and there's different timelines, or like Star Trek.
Yes,
the new Star Trek movies are like a different timeline now than the other Star Trek, but they're all canon.
Yeah, I guess
it's like a different universe.
It bothers me because I really like Halloween 2, and I also like Halloween 3, but that's a different story for a different day. Anyways, yeah, they have taken a lot of liberties with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but the OG one from 1974, so many filmmakers have said that was like quintessential to them filmmaking. Like Rob Zombie, that's like one of his favorite films, which if you've ever seen any type of Rob Zombie film, you're like, oh yeah, I see it.
I haven't, but I can tell you that the reason I haven't seen any of them, that makes sense. Like they just, I don't know, they're a little too sticky for me.
Yes, I said even the good guys in Rob Zombie films, I feel like all need to take a bath. Everyone needs to take a bath. Like, it's just a good old, let's get some Head and Shoulders in there. Let's get some Dawn dish soap maybe, because we're gritty.
Yeah, I always described, like, the look of a Rob Zombie movie reminds me of when I was in high school and you'd be walking in the hallway and you would get, like, a whiff of something that was maybe, like, banana peppery, and it was like, oh, like, somebody ate a Subway sandwich, but then it was just, like, a dirty boy who hadn't discovered deodorant yet.
Yes.
And so I always call that Subway BO.
Yes.
And that's, like, every one of those movies, and even a little bit Texas Chainsaw, like, looks like everyone smells like Subway BO.
You're not wrong. I feel like Texas Chainsaw might smell a little bit worse only because there's cannibalism involved.
And like farm creatures, probably.
And just rotting meat. I just feel like that's probably a smell. So just death on top of Subway BO.
Which, unfortunately, we're also very well acquainted with the scent of death recently.
Yes.
Beth and I have seen some unfortunate rodent situations.
Yes. I actually, I really have seen them because I have been the discoverer of death.
And I have not seen them. I just smelled it and knew what it was and made her go check it because I don't even eat animals. I can't look at them on the side of the road when they're dead. I didn't want to have to look at a poor little Fievel-Mouskowitz.
I didn't either, but I also have a super sniffer, so I was like, yeah, what am I smelling? Oh yeah, you're definitely right. And then to have to tell other people and then like sniff it out is a whole other.
It's like the bad version of Legolas. What do your elf eyes see? Beth, what does your deaf nose smell?
Oh, it stinks. It stinks so bad.
A gross, sweet Subway BO stink.
So another movie I want to mention is Maximum Overdrive, which takes place during July.
I did not realize that was a summer movie.
This is Stephen King's only directorial debut. It's his directorial debut. It's also the only movie he has directed because it did not do well.
And boy, can you tell he was on a lot of cocaine when he made it.
Yep, he has said as much. So for those of you who don't know what that movie's about, essentially a comet passes over Earth and it makes all of technology, so anything that has like a motor or anything like that, come to life. So you have ATM machines spitting out stuff at people. You have one man dies via soda cans because they're pelting out at him in a baseball field.
Poor kid too, like a little leaguer, like sees it happening and runs, and it's like cans are flying at him as he's fleeing the murder of his coach.
So then Emilio Estevez stars in it. This is based off of one of Stephen King's short stories in Night Shift. But Emilio Estevez plays a ex-convict who works at a cook at this diner. It's kind of like in the middle of nowhere. And these trucks, who are not manned by anybody, they have a mind of their own, essentially are surrounding this diner with people trapped inside. And so they're trying to... And the head truck is a truck with the Green Goblin on it, which is visually interesting. Yeah,
I mean, it certainly looks like it would be a villain in something, but like a very Scooby-Doo villain.
Yes. So it's essentially about this band of survivors trying to outmaneuver these semi-trucks to get away from them.
You know who I can't stand in this movie?
Who's that?
So there's like this young couple, like I think they just got married, and one of them, it's Yeardley Smith, who is Lisa Simpson.
Okay, yeah.
And her husband, I hate him. Like, from the beginning, when she's like, I gotta pee, and he's like, can I watch? And I was like, oh, God, I hope you die first. I hate him.
That's fair. That's fair. So here's the thing. I did not realize it was, I guess again, my standard for movies must be pretty low for horror. Like, I'm always like, did I have a good time watching it? Because if I had a good time, even if it's a really terrible movie and like it's considered a B or a C movie, I don't care. I'll watch it.
Yeah. Listen, I wore it today on purpose. I'm wearing my Final Girls Club shirt from Superyaki, which their motto is like, it's okay to like bad movies. Right. And Beth and we love them. Superyaki, if you find us, we love all your stuff. We love all your collabs. We keep giving you money.
We do.
Thank you for existing.
We appreciate it.
And so I agree. There is a place for movies where not everything needs to be analyzed. Sometimes it is fun to just have like a mindless 2 hours.
And I'll be honest with you, I enjoyed Maximum Overdrive.
Yeah, it is a mess, but it is fun.
Also, Emilio Estevez, cutie patootie in that movie. I was like, okay.
Yeah, there's a reason he was part of the Brat Pack. He's a babe.
So, yes, I didn't know if you knew that movie, but I was like, I knew you watched it, but I was like, I think she's going to enjoy this.
I like completely forgot about that when I was trying to compile my list. Since we're still talking about like sweaty movies, I'm going to bring up Straw Dogs. Have you seen Straw Dogs?
I haven't, because I know that Alexander Skarsgård's in it, and that's my boy.
You would not like him in
And I
this.
think he plays a racist POS in it, so I'm like, I don't.
So this is actually,
he's always a villain, but I don't want that.
He's got a good villain face. So Straw Dogs, that is actually the remake with James Marsden. The original Straw Dogs is actually Dustin Hoffman plays the lead in it.
Oh God,
he's very young, and it was an Australian movie, and so it takes place in Australia. It is essentially the same plot. They have just sort of adapted things sideways to like, what is the equivalent of that in America? So the remake takes place in, I believe it's Alabama, rather than like sort of the boonies of Australia. And the plot is that he's essentially like a academic in both movies. And the Dustin Hoffman one, I think he is like a science researcher who got like he essentially is given time to go and like study things out in the middle of nowhere in Australia, and he's got this like beautiful wife, and she's from the small town that they go live in.
Right.
In the remake, James Marsden is a Hollywood movie writer, and his wife is an actress.
Okay.
And they go back to her small town that she's from.
Like James Marsden too. He's also cutie patootie.
Well, let me tell you.
Oh no.
He's great. He's an excellent actor. He also is a fantastic singer, and they should let him sing in more things. But my main issue with this movie, with both movies, is that it makes me hate every single man involved in the story. They are all useless. Okay. Every single one of them is useless, and for different reasons. And so, because I've watched the remake more recently, I'm going to kind of switch over to talk about that. But it is essentially the same story in both, including like the deaths at the end. And the main idea is that James Marsden is trying to work on a movie. They move back to this little middle of nowhere town where his wife grew up, and are going to live in her late father's house. And it's a farm, and it needs some work done on the roof, and they've already hired local men to work on it. So they're just like, okay, whatever, like we're just going to move in. That's already taken care of. Once the roof's done, like we're cool. And it is like a kind of remote farm outside of town, and there's a long road that leads up to it and sort of dead ends in the house, and they're like zipping around in this little like very Hollywood sports car. Like it's a convertible, it's streamlined, it's like one of those ones where the trunk is in the front rather than the back.
Oh, fancy.
And so everyone keeps calling him like Mr. Hollywood and everything, and they go to the local bar, which is where everyone goes because it's like the only restaurant type place in town.
Mm-hmm. And
immediately you are introduced to like the glory days football players. Like this is the town where it's like, you know, the football team is everything. They're the closest to like local gods. Okay. And then that's where the title comes from. It is Straw Dogs. So essentially in some Asian cultures, there's a history of making these dogs out of straw to like sort of worship in ceremonies, and then when you are done with that ceremony, you just sort of cast them aside.
Okay.
So they've served their purpose and now they're useless.
Okay.
And that is the equivalent of these men,
Of
these like very rough men who like at one point were revered and now are just like, well, we do construction.
Right.
That's it. That's my life. And the local, like their coach it's James Woods, who is just a garbage bag human being. So I don't feel bad hating him in this. He is the equivalent of when you are in Philadelphia. Like I remember we would hate walking on garbage day because there was always just like a weird water that would leak out of the garbage trucks, and it was just like garbage water and it had a stink. And that is James Woods is the human equivalent of that. And so he is like a racist. He is violent. He's an alcoholic. He is immediately very combative against the bartender, who is also the local sheriff and is like one of the only people of color in the entire town.
I love
And
small town movies where they have like 8 million jobs.
yeah, and he's got a teenage daughter who is in love with a local man. He's an adult, but he has like a developmental disability. And he was on Prison Break. Do you remember that show?
I remember of that show.
He was one of the brothers on Prison Break. And so that's slightly problematic because I do know that he, as an actor, as a person, it's not our own stories kind of thing. Like he does not have a developmental disability, but he is playing someone who has one.
Gotcha.
It's not a caricature essentially, so that's good, I guess, but that is slightly problematic. So there's a teenage girl who's in love with this man who has gotten in trouble in the past because he just simply doesn't understand certain situations and that he is acting inappropriately.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a brother who takes care of him, who's also an adult. And the coach hates him because he wants him to stay away from his daughter. And he threatens him like multiple times and threatens to shoot him and to murder him. And this is sort of James Marsden's introduction to the town that his wife grew up in.
Wow, great.
Oh, and on top of that is also Alexander Skarsgård, who was Eric on True Blood. He was on the final season of Succession.
He was in Big Little Lies as also a bad guy.
He was in The Northman.
In The Northman. And he played Tarzan.
Yeah. He's a giant man with a very good
man.
Bad guy face.
Yes.
And so he, in high school, dated James Marsden's wife in the movie. So that's her ex-boyfriend. He's a straw dog. He's in this town. He's always going to back up Coach because that's what he knows. So They have these issues with him. He is one of the men who is there to work on their house and is immediately inappropriate with the wife. There's like scenes of her running, and they're just like driving really slowly behind her to watch her and like watch her butt. And then, she's annoyed that her husband isn't doing anything to stop them from being gross. And this is where I started immediately to just like see red and then hear the Ironside song, like the Kill Bill, like sirens. She's like, well, couldn't you say something about it? And he's like, well, maybe you should wear a bra. And she's like, are you saying I'm asking for this? And he just sort of laughs it off. So what? Red flag number 1.
Yeah.
And as it goes on, they find a cat. They name it Flutie because it was like in the fire. It was in like the fireplace when they opened the flute. And so they have this cat, and they go away to like a church thing. And James Marsden is like very dismissive of like the small town. Like everybody goes to the same church. Everybody's religious. He's not. And he's just like, religion, that's like not my thing. Like God and religion, which offends Alexander Skarsgård's character, who already doesn't like him because to him, he's not a real man. He like dresses in frou-frou outfits. Like he's got tight fitting trousers and like nice button downs. And he's got his little sunglasses and he drives this fancy car. And now he's walking out of church and he's not respecting their community. And so they're kind of getting into it. And then they go home, and this is another thing I hate in movies is animal death. Somebody has killed and hung their cat in their house while they were gone.
God.
And so she's like, it has to be them. Like, you need to say something to them. It has to be them. And he's like, well, I can't just accuse them. Like, I can't just outright say, like, you killed my cat and fire them. And she's like, well, why not? And he's like, because you don't do that. Like, I'll bring it up and I'll see how they react.
Oh my God.
Like I said, useless. And growing tensions are happening with the rest of the people in town. There's like a football game coming up. They're all kind of gathered for like practice outside and like a function, like a community function. And the man with the developmental disability is seen talking to the teenage girl, and her father attacks him. And the wife gets involved because she sees no one else is going to stop him. And he's on top of him, beating him in the head.
Jesus.
And this man is like yelling, get off me, get off me. And James Wood is just like beating his head in. And so she intervenes and tells him to leave him alone and that he was just talking. He wasn't doing anything wrong. And James Marsden makes them leave.
Oh,
and they get in the car and he's like, I'm not very happy with you. Like, why do you have to keep putting yourself in these situations? I'm never going to jump into the fray. That's not who I am. I don't do that.
Buddy.
So, again, strike number 2. You're not standing up for your wife. You're yelling at her. So, he decides, I got to go, like, fire these guys. Like, we got to get rid of them. This is, like, too much. And then they sense this, and they invite him to go hunting with them.
Oh.
And while he goes hunting with them, she is home alone. She's going for her run. She takes a shower. Someone knocks on the door. It's Alexander Skarsgård.
Oh, I feel like I know where this is going. But
And here is where the very disturbing scenes begin. There are multiple rape scenes in this movie. So if that is a no-go for you, please don't watch this. You're not going to... It's bad.
the racism was like one of the reasons I was like, I know that there's a bunch of racist characters in this. So I was like, all right. So I didn't even have to get that far.
So essentially he has interpreted her interactions with him as her wanting to rekindle their romance. And I'm not even going to like gild the lily here. He rapes her, but he does not realize that it is rape until after he has already done it. When
Christ.
He fully realizes that it's not just her saying no, but meaning yes. It is, she really and truly did not want this. And while he is sort of shell-shocked in the moment, his friend pulls her over the back of the couch and also rapes her. And he just sits in a chair and lets it happen. And she's screaming for him to help her, and he doesn't do anything. So that's awful. And then she does not tell her husband about this. She sees them in public at a football game later and like has a PTSD sort of reaction to it. She's like, she wants to get out. So they leave. And during the same football game, the teenage girl gets the older man to come away with her and talk, and she's trying to seduce him essentially, and he knows that he's not supposed to talk to her, but he also in the past, like even when nothing was happening, was saying, but she's my girlfriend. And everyone's saying, like, don't say that, she's not your girlfriend, that's not okay, you don't talk to her. Well, the two of them are alone. She's trying to seduce him. He hears people coming and panics, and it is essentially a Lenny of Mice and Men moment where he covers her mouth to keep her from screaming and accidentally kills her.
Oh, God.
And then he knows that he's done something awful, and he panics, and he runs. And while James Marsden and his wife are leaving the football game, they hit him with their car.
Oh, my God.
And so they take him back to their house because the hospital's very far away, and he's like, we're going to take him back to the house, we're going to call an ambulance, like, he's my responsibility, I need to take care of this man. And while they're in the house, the coach and all of the straw dogs realize that the daughter's missing, can't find her, and come hunting this man down because he just assumes that he is to blame, which is true in this case, but that's his first thought, is it's that guy. So he comes hunting him down. They show up at the house. They refuse to let them in. They won't send this man out. And even when the sheriff shows up, James Marsden still refuses to send him out. He says, no, like, you're in it with them. Like, you're just going to hand him over. I'm not sending him out. You bring the state police here, and I will turn him over to them. And while this is happening, he is looking through the peephole, and sees James Woods grab a shotgun behind the sheriff and tries to warn him, but it's too late and the sheriff gets shot in the back.
Holy crap.
And then from here, it very quickly becomes a home invasion, home defense situation with the wife and a developmentally disabled man with a broken arm who is full on panicking now upstairs, James Marsden downstairs, and trying to keep them out of his house. So like this is incredibly graphic and violent. Like the one man, he's like stabbing his hand and like pinning him to a wall, and he gets like decapitated by a window. He pours like boiling oil on somebody else. Another man, the second man who actually raped his wife, climbs the side of the building and comes in through an upstairs window and attempts to rape her again. What? And this ends in a standoff with Alexander Skarsgård pulling a gun on his buddy, the buddy pulling a gun on him. She also has a shotgun, and like it's a whole it's a weird situation up there. But the most violent and insane death out of the whole thing is there is like a decorative man trap, or like we would probably call it like a bear trap. One of those ones where it's like sensor loaded and it has the jaws that snap closed and the teeth like meet in the bone. So they have one of those, and it's just been in the house, and Alexander Skarsgård is coming down the stairs trying to get her to just come with him, and he's like, I'll take care of you, I'll always take care of you, baby, why are you so scared of me, like we'll be fine, just let me take care of you. And James Marsden slams it down on top of his head.
Oh my god.
And essentially decapitates him.
Holy crap. This movie is wild.
It is insane, and it's the same deaths in the Dustin Hoffman one, and it literally ends with the same line of him saying, I got all of them. Which again, like, you've been useless this whole movie. Your wife is traumatized. This poor man, you hit him with your car, and all you can think of is like, yay me, I murdered all of these guys.
Good job. God.
Yeah.
Whew. Well, let's see if I have any lighter movies
So I have a lighter one, actually. It's a horror comedy, which, you know, I love horror comedies.
I love those too.
And it's actually newer. It's The Blackening.
Okay. Yeah, I that's on my list to see. I have not seen it
I'm
yet.
not going to spoil any of the stuff then. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that we see more movies like this, because and I love Monkey Paw. Oh, excuse me. Monkey Paw Productions is doing this a lot. Jordan Peele. It got me. It got me. So we are seeing more of these like horror and horror comedy movies that have like all black casts or people of color,
right?
And they're not just,
they're not just victims,
and it's not just tropes either.
Yes.
And so The Blackening is kind of along those same lines. So I'm glad that we're seeing more of these, and it is actually like probably the only movie I can think of that the whole premise is that these friends are gathered together to celebrate Juneteenth.
Mm-hmm. I can't think of any other movies that are set on Juneteenth. So
yeah, so I love that. And it's like, it does get a little bit tropey because it is a comedy. So they are kind of pointing out horror expectations. So it's like, oh, it's the group of college friends who are reuniting for like a weekend after years. And some of them have drifted apart. Some of them have like histories together. But they gather at this cabin. It's essentially like an Airbnb type thing they rented. Diedrich Bader is in it from the Drew Carey Show.
Yeah.
I used to call him Hollywood Cicada because he would just disappear and then come back like every 17 years, and like everyone is like fascinated by him.
He plays Jethro in the Beverly Hillbillies.
Yes. Yeah. Love Diedrich Bader. Love him. He's also like, isn't he Batman's voice in something?
I think you're correct.
He does a lot of like voice work and animation. So he's in it as like a park ranger whose name is Officer White or Ranger White, which I think is hysterical.
It is really funny.
There's some hysterical jokes in it, and I'm not gonna like ruin anything, but there's in the beginning when they're in the car, like 3 of the characters are driving up. It's 2 of the girls and then one of the guys, and they're in the car, and he's like, well, who all gonna be there? Because you said 8 people are gonna be there, and I know 7, so it better not be Namdi, because he's got beef with their friend Namdi. And the two girls look at each other and they have like a whole discussion with just their facial expressions, but there's voiceover over it, which I love because women 100% do that. Identifying people 100% do that.
Yes.
So they have that whole conversation in the cold opening. It's like it starts with like very horror tropey things where it's like a girl by herself and then like a door creaks open and then like her boyfriend startles her, and that feels like a very like horror norm type thing,
right?
And when the door is creaking open, she's trying to see who's there. She's like who's there nope, that's 2DMX, hold on, and like backs it up. They also there's a board game involved. Like this group of friends gets together and they play board games whenever they reunite. And so they find this board game, this very racist board game. It's got a very like blackface caricature logo on it.
Oh, great.
And the game is called The Blackening, which is where the title comes from.
Okay.
And there are some trivia questions involved in it. And one of the trivia questions involves the recasting of Aunt Viv on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, which is just, it's so great. If you were a fan of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air at any point in your life, like you know the whole drama about original Aunt Viv and recast Aunt Viv, or as they phrase it in the movie, dark-skinned Aunt Viv and light-skinned Aunt Viv. So there's that. There's a trivia question that involves Friends, and they all are like, well, I never watched Friends, but I know that this happened in an episode. And, oh, well, I never watched Friends, but I do know that this happened. And, well, I had never watched Friends ever in my life, but I heard that this happened. So, like, they've all clearly seen Friends, which is really funny. There's an O'Reilly's Auto Parts joke.
Oh, my God.
There's a great moment where the one girl's like, this feels like the end of Set It Off. I'm so sad. And then they just straight quote the movie. There's like a very good twist also with Allison, one of the characters, who they give her Adderall and they don't tell her what she takes. And then she has like a beautiful mind moment where like everything is like she can like smell colors and she can taste numbers, and she all of a sudden has like insane like Black Panther skills in a fight. So it like pop culture reference wise, comedy wise, pacing wise, twist wise, this movie was so good. So I hope we get more like that.
Yeah. So since we're on that note, we should mention Us by Jordan Peele. So here's the thing. I think it's set during summer. It's definitely set in California, and it's also set. It was Jordan Peele. Love him as a director. Clearly knows his stuff with horror movies, and I love when newer horror directors like pay homage to like other horror movies. So like Us and The Lost Boys are clearly set in Santa Barbara, like with the beautiful boardwalk and the amusement park and stuff. Like both of those are like quintessential to the plot of the film. Us is so good. It's so I think that's my favorite Jordan Peele film. I
think Nope is my favorite.
Nope's really good too.
But I do really enjoy Us as well. I never in my life would have thought that I would be afraid of that song. I got 5 on it. Like the opening of that song now is terrifying because of that movie.
Dun, dun, dun. Thank you also like TikTok for like just really pulverizing that song and using it to a creepy extent. But that movie's really good. If you haven't seen it, would definitely recommend it. It have major summer vibes.
I love Winston Duke in that movie
Winston Duke is so dreamy in it too. I'm like,
and I feel like prior to that, most people only knew him. Well, I'm not gonna say most people. I think probably most white people only knew him as M'Baku from
Black Panther.
Yeah. And then he's just like such a great like nerdy, like hot nerdy dad.
Yeah. Lupita's so good in that movie. And even like all the white characters are also good. I think Elizabeth Moss is in that.
She is in it, and she's like such a like there's like so many things I hate about her character because it's too real, but she plays it so well.
Tim Heidecker plays her husband. Yeah, from Tim and Eric, which is so silly. I love that they don't really do that as much anymore, but I'm like, that is his background, is like that weird show, weird and weirdly funny show, and then he like will randomly be in movies like Bridesmaids and like this movie, and I'm like, I mean, good for you, man, for the range.
Yeah.
But if you haven't seen the movie of Us, essentially Lupita's character at the beginning of the film is, she's a little girl, she gets lost on the boardwalk. She comes back from this traumatizing event, and then it jumps to her being an adult, and her and Winston Duke have 2 kids, and they're going on vacation on their like summer home, and it's very close to Santa Barbara and the boardwalk, and they are essentially terrorized by these like alternate versions of themselves.
I hate, like, I have an issue with body horror. That's just me. I hate animal death, and the thing that scares me the most, and I probably shouldn't put this out in public because now people are going to use it against me, but it's the reason I hate the movie The Strangers. I hate when you like look out a window and there's just someone standing there staring, and it's got to be like psychologically some kind of like control issue, because there's nothing you can do to make them go away, but they're still somehow like invading your space without invading your space. And that scene where they're like at the top of the driveway and he goes out with like the baseball bat is so scary.
They like don't do anything, they're just standing there, but it is utterly terrifying. It's also like, I don't know if we should spoil this movie or not.
Let's not spoil it. It's still like new enough that I feel like people maybe haven't seen it.
So definitely worth a watch. It's got a really interesting plot twist. All of Jordan Peele's movies have very interesting and unique plot twists, and they're all like, all right, here's what you know about this horror trope. Let me turn it on its head and like make it unique, make it fresh, make it interesting.
Right, and they're all like really relevant culturally to today, and like some social issues that I think everybody can recognize, that like you expect one thing to be the horror, but then the horror is like the real thing that we all just kind of ignore in real life.
Right. And I just after this strike is over, I just so badly want to see more spooky movies from him, because I'm like, I only have 3, let me just rewatch these.
He's also great on the Twilight Zone remake as the host. He was really good on that.
So since we're in Santa Barbara, we should talk about Santa Carla, aka The Lost Boys, which also, again, another bangin' 80s soundtrack.
So good.
And really up until this point, because this was Joel Schumacher, up until this point, vampire movies weren't youthful. Like, you had Christopher Lee, who, you know, as like Hammer Dracula was considered like sexy, kinda. I don't find him sexy, but like to each their own. But he was like kind of suave and sophisticated, but they didn't really have like young, beautiful men playing vampires. And so, you know, the tagline of Lost Boys is sleep all day, party all night. It's fun to be a vampire. And then you have all of these beautiful and young and very like relevant actors to that time, like Kiefer Sutherland. Like
this was really the height of like, wow, you're attractive, but you are very scary in this moment, Kiefer Sutherland.
Yes.
Which if you listen to all of our episodes, we will discuss him, or have already discussed him, depending on when this comes out, in one of our other book related episodes.
But you know, and then you have the Coreys, and you have both the Coreys in it, and then you have Jason Patric in it, who plays the main character, Michael.
Gosh, just like the best hair.
Dreamy, so dreamy.
Does he also wear like a dangly earring?
He wears a dangly earring. It's really funny because at one point when there's a sex scene in that, it's because it's Joel Schumacher, it's very much the male gaze isn't on Star, it's on Michael, because Joel Schumacher is gay. So I was like, you know what? I appreciate that.
Thank you, Joel.
Yeah, thank you. We don't get that a lot, but it is very much like focused more on him and less on her. So if you haven't seen the film, you should. My God, why haven't you already? But it is about two boys and their mom who is recently divorced, moving from Arizona to Santa Carla, California. And they are moving in with their grandpa. And you right away know that things are kind of like, it starts with the Doors singing like People Are Strange. And you already know that something is amiss because, like, them just venturing out into the boardwalk, there's a lot of missing people signs, like you see on the back of the, like, welcome to Santa Carla. It's, like, murder capital of the world. So you know right away that, like, something's amiss, that, like, there's bad things afoot. And so they notice that, like, Michael is trying to find like a job on the boardwalk. He's looking and he meets the wrong people, of course. And so he gets involved with like this gang. And at first he's like, they're just like a gang and they're like kind of jerks. And then quickly realizes that they're like, like vampires, blood-sucking vampires. Which is juxtaposed with like the Corey's meeting. Well, Corey Haim is the younger brother, and he notices his brother's acting funny, and then he goes to like this comic book store, and he's the type of person that doesn't look like he would know anything about comics. And like the Frog Brothers, which is the other
Corey
Feldman,
and who's the other brother?
And they also Truth, Justice, and the American Way. love me some Frog Brothers.
Jameson Newlander is Alan.
So these two brothers essentially are like, your brother's a blood-sucking vampire, you have to kill him. And he's like, I can't kill my brother. Yeah. And so this movie leads to them trying to cure Michael of his vampirism and also find out who the head vampire is. And they think it's Kiefer Sutherland's character, who is so good at being like a vampire. Also, we didn't even mention Bill and Ted's we didn't mention Alex Winters is also in it, which he's got like a crazy mullet in it. But I remember I had like a little bit of a crush on him at that point because I had just seen, before I saw this movie, I saw Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and I was like, he wears that cool crop top. Like, he's very cute. I like his curly hair.
He's got a crop top. He's got the Justin Timberlake ramen noodle hair, which was like a vibe back then.
Yep. But his is like all natural.
Yeah. It's not the bleached and the pasted.
His was all natural. So you got all these like vampires, and essentially they set it up to this big face off of like them invading the home and them preparing, like there's a whole montage scene of them getting ready to face off the vampire. So you have like a bath of holy water and garlic water, so one of the vampires like melts in the bathtub.
Yeah. It's also, this movie also has just some ridiculous like one-liners that Beth and I quote a lot.
Yes.
That's I mean, I guess it's not like, well, it is like a love language. I feel like probably a good 75% of my everyday vernacular is really just movie quotes. Yeah. And that's how I communicate things most of the time. But they're just noodles.
They're just noodles. How could 7 billion people be wrong?
Yeah.
How could 7 billion people be wrong, Michael?
Yeah. And it's also got that, the Cry Little Sister song.
And the Sax Man. How can we forget the Sax Man?
I don't ever want to sing more than a line on this because I'm like, we can't license anything, so nobody sue us. We're just trying to talk about good soundtracks.
Yeah. It's definitely worth a watch. And to me, it's kind of a quintessential modern vampire movie.
Yeah.
And it really ushered in an age. Like, if we didn't see The Lost Boys, I don't think we would have seen like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Angel or just any kind of modern vampire movie.
Yeah, I agree. Jumping sideways from Corey Feldman and that, there is another horror comedy that involves Corey Feldman. Summertime. Do you know what I'm going to say?
I don't, but
It also involves America's Dad, Tom Hanks. It's The Burbs.
Yeah, I was gonna say, wait, it was
One
on
of-
the tip of my tongue.
One of my favorite movies of all time, The Burbs. Man, this movie also has a lot of great quotable one-liners, but it is essentially, it's from 1989. It actually came out in February, but it is set like in the summertime,
which makes sense.
so I was essentially 3 years old when this came out, and I love it. But it's Tom Hanks. He's Ray Peterson, and he's like got a week off from work, so he's like, I don't want to do anything. I just want to stay home and like lounge and like maybe, you know, take care of my yard and hang out with my neighbor buddies who I kind of like but kind of hate, and that's like all I want to do. And his wife is Carrie Fisher, actually plays his wife in this movie.
Know that. Yes.
And he, during this week home, becomes super fixated on his next door neighbors, the Klopeks, who are just a bunch of like very strange people who, like, the patriarch of the family has this mysterious, maybe like Eastern European, maybe Slavic accent, and they keep hearing weird noises in the basement, and these are kind of newer neighbors, and he has these other neighbors in his like little cul-de-sac. There's Art, who is, it's Laura Dern's dad, Bruce Dern.
Oh, Bruce Dern, yeah.
He's like, he's a Vietnam vet. Like, your first introduction to him is running the flag up the flagpole and saluting it in the morning while playing the national anthem. And then there's Mark is his other friend, and Corey Feldman is one of the neighborhood kids who kind of like, he's like, well, I got nothing else to do. I'm gonna hang out with like Mr. Peterson and Mr. Rumsfeld and see what's going on. And together, as this like week progresses, they all start to assume that the Klopeks are actually murderers. And they see like one of the Klopek kids, like the younger guy, is like hauling like a huge garbage bag out and then just like punching the crap out of it to make it like go into the garbage can. And the same night, like, it starts raining, and during the rainstorm, Ray like looks outside and he sees them digging in the backyard, which is very suspicious. And so the next morning they like jump the garbage truck and start digging through the garbage bags to see if they find any dead bodies or anything, but there's nothing. They go inside. They have this other neighbor that they hate. He's like really rude. He's got this little frou-frou dog that comes and poops in like Art's front yard all the time, and he gets mad about it. And they see the dog running loose, and so that's weird that he doesn't usually let the dog do that. So they go to check on him, and Corey Feldman goes with them. Corey Feldman plays Ricky. And so they go inside Walter's house, and it's like trashed, and they find his toupee but no Walter.
Uh-oh.
And so Ray takes the dog and he puts the toupee like back through the mail slot after they leave, which is hysterical. And he like turns around and he sees one of the Klopeks watching him. And so they're like, oh no, like they used Walter as a human sacrifice. They killed him. And then Ray goes digging in the backyard, like along the fence line. And I think the dog actually helps dig it up. And there's like a human femur that they pull up.
God.
And the scene is so good of just like Tom Hanks and like his buddy, and they're like holding a bone and just like screaming. And then there's like another thing where they're like, well, don't you remember like the ice cream truck killer, and he put the bodies in the cooler, and you remember this? And everyone was like, why do these milkshakes smell like death? And it's because he murdered people.
Oh
and
my
he's
God.
like, maybe it was, subliminal messaging, Ray, have you heard it? Satan is our friend, Satan is our pal. It's so many stupid one-liners. But so they think their neighbors are murderers, and it's just sort of, it all could have been solved if they would have just made like a simple decision to be like, hey, what happened to our neighbor? Maybe we should ask the cops or whatever.
Which is funny because that's almost similar in premise and plot to a lesser known but newer movie, Summer of '84, which is about young boys. The one boy is a paper boy throughout the neighborhood, and they keep finding missing kids. And he suspects that it is his neighbor. And like, it's essentially him and his buddies like investigating this neighbor, and without giving too much away, it's the same premise that they think their neighbor is a murderer, and so they're trying to find ways to like find out if that truly is the case. But the twist, it's a really good twist at the end, and it's like a very serious like horror movie, but that one's also really good. There is like another plot twist at the end that like got me, and it does not end the way I was expecting it to. So if you're looking for like a newer horror movie that's set, it's called Summer of '84 because it's literally set in 1984. That would be one to check out. And I feel like we should end soon, but I think before we end, we should talk about Sleepaway Camp since we mentioned it. So for those of you who have not watched Sleepaway Camp, this was a movie made in the 80s. The premise of it is about a girl named Angela who is going to this summer camp, and she's new and she's very shy. I think she's with her cousin. Yes. And she doesn't want to really participate in many of the activities, and all the kids, pardon my French, they're like assholes. Like throughout the entire thing. And then shortly as they're in the camp, people start getting hurt. So like the cook, who's like kind of creepy anyways, gets like burning water thrown all over him, so he gets like 3rd-degree burns. And then like people start getting like picked off one by one, and so they're trying to figure out who the killer is. Peak aesthetic in this movie, all the boys are wearing short shorts and crop shirts. Everyone's wearing short shorts and crop shirts, and this has probably one of the most wild plot twists of all time for like slasher movies. To this day, like it's considered like one of the biggest plot twists of all time. But it has like people have really visceral reactions. So it's one movie that I can like understand the value for. Is it a movie I like? Not necessarily. It makes me feel squicky. There's not a lot of characters that you identify with. There's not a lot of characters that you like can root for, because they're all kind of jerks, like really big jerks. And then the plot twist is so wild that you're just like, what? And then you kind of understand why Angela is the way she is. Yes. Yeah. Certainly in the context of the story, it makes sense, I guess we'll say, as a plot twist, as a resolution to the film. I personally hate it, and I don't know how to explain that without spoiling the twist. So I'm going to say, if you haven't seen it, just like skip ahead a minute in this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say something, and then you'll be spoiler free, because it's not going to take me a minute to say it. So just skip ahead a minute if you don't want this spoiled for you. If you don't care, just listen on. So my issue with this is that I do not like that this sort of plays into the villainization of trans people. Oh, for sure. For sure. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I would say I don't identify that way. But I am in the horror community, and there are some people that do identify that, think that movie is fine. I don't feel like, because I'm not in that, I am just supportive and an ally. I try to be cognizant of these things. I feel like everybody gets to make their own judgment on it, and I'm not going to be like, well, you're wrong, because it is such a visceral reaction. And as I said, leading up to that point, do you feel bad for any of the people that die? No, because they're all assholes. Yep. There's a girl that gets murdered, and you're like, good, glad, goodbye. But it's just one of those movies that if you don't know what the ending is, it's really shocking. Oh, 100%. I would say it is a good contender to be in the slasher genre. So if you're looking for a very much a summertime movie that's not Friday the 13th, that you are going in kind of blind to, this would be an okay one. But if you, I don't know what to say to, like, without giving any spoilers away. If you are sensitive to certain minority groups, mm-hmm. Or if you are part of a minority group and you are sensitive to how society has kind of misconstrued some things about them, go on like the doesthedogdie.com first
and look
Yep.
it up, because
Yep.
it'll give you any trigger warnings before you watch it. If you're not triggered by those kind of things, don't look up what happens in the movie first. Go into it blind, because it's much more thrilling to see it happen in real time than to know it's coming.
Yeah,
So
the twist is honestly like one of the most iconic like twists in horror films. Like the image is like eviscerated in everybody's brains once you've seen it. You can't unsee it.
yeah.
So on that note, we gave you a lot of horror films to think about, percolate on, watch, of course. I don't even think we went through every single movie on our list, but if we did, we would be here for hours.
Yeah. Off the top of my head, there's like probably like enough to go on both hands that I could mention right now that also go to the list. You can watch them. I'm sure that there are plenty of listicles online if you just want to search for summer horror films.
For sure. But I feel like we gave you guys some new stuff, some old stuff, some underrated stuff, and stuff that you're like, oh yeah, I've seen that a million times, but thank you. I'm going to knock and like, yes, that's right. That's a great movie.
Yeah.
So once again, thank you for listening to the Lake Erie Library, and we will come back to you guys soon.
That's right. Please subscribe. Please comment. Please rate us. That helps us. Tell your friends if you love us. Keep listening. If you hate us, tell your enemies. You can follow us on Instagram at the Lake Erie Library. It's Erie with two E's, as in spooky. And we'll catch you next time.
All right. Have a good one. Stay spooky.